WCNC Charlotte. This is Flashpoint, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered.
Thanks for joining us here on Flashpoint. I'm Ben Thompson. In most states, the Secretary of State is responsible for overseeing the election. In North Carolina, that job is done by the State Board of Elections. Instead, the Secretary of State is tasked with strengthening the state's economy and working with businesses. Elaine Marshall has been the Secretary of State here in North Carolina for more than 30 years, and this year she's running for 4 more. She's going to be challenged by Republican Chad Brown, a county commissioner in Gaston County, looking to be the first Republican North Carolina Secretary of State in more than 100 years. Secretary Marshall, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming back on the show. Good to see you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity.
As you know, you are no stranger to elections. You've been in public office now, I think about almost 30 years now. Why?
When you combine, yes, yeah.
Yeah, why do you want to stay in this job 4 more years?
Well, certainly it's fun, it's challenging, and I'm really hitting my stride on rural economic development. Our rural-urban divide is just really unconscionable. We have counties that are on the point of almost dying. Young people don't come back. It's a terrible thing for families. It's a brain drain. And we need their leadership. We need economic opportunity to grow from within, because a lot of these counties are not going to attract an industry that's going to come and hire 100, 200, 300 for a whole variety of reasons. So it's got to be homegrown businesses. And my program, Rural Rise, RISE, stands for Resources for Innovators, Startups, and Entrepreneurs. Now, the information that we're spoon feeding these people that form new businesses is not unique to rural areas. Urban areas need it also. So the same information that we're pushing out there is good for every business, startups and older ones. But we're particularly emphasizing the rural area because the ecosystem for entrepreneurs is not very thick. It's thin in these areas, and people don't know that there are resources that the state, federal, and other governments, nonprofits provide to them in a lot of cases for free to get started. So there's a wealth of information out there, but a lot of entrepreneurs do not know about it. And so we're trying to help them learn and particularly get them credit worthy so that if they need a loan, they can go get it, and help them with government regulations, because business counselors can help them fill out the forms that they find just almost impossible to fill out. So there are trained people out there to help, but people don't know it. So we're trying to be the big microphone, because we're the very first one who knows when somebody wakes up in the morning and says, today's the day I'm going to start my business.
We touched on it before your interview. A lot of people hear Secretary of State and they think you're a foreign diplomat. But if they think something else, they probably think you're in charge of elections. Explain what it is. You touched on it in your first response, but explain exactly the responsibility of Secretary of State in North Carolina and why it's so different than what people may expect it to be.
Right. Our mission is to support economic development in this state. And we do that through the formation of businesses, LLCs, corporations. We do that by supporting the bank lending database of liens called Uniform Commercial Code documents. We do that through the notary program, which is administered here. And in some of these areas, I have law enforcement authority. We do that through vetting out investment opportunities that are being offered to North Carolina, and actually regulate all of the stockbrokers and investment advisors in this state, and have law enforcement authority if some of them become rogue, or the people that are just not licensed at all, that are pure out and out crooks. We have law enforcement authority to go after them as they attempt to scam North Carolinians, particularly seniors. And we do a lot of education with seniors to kind of raise their awareness about the kind of things that they should be looking for when they're approached to make an investment. So we have a lot of business infrastructure. We also assist the registers of deeds with land records and some of their contracting and indexing to make sure that there's a consistency across the state. So there are 200 different statutes. And you did mention international, and we do have some small statutes for that. And we have international functions and protocol here. But we are infrastructure for a lot of the business functions of this state. Every day, people look at our database to make buy, sell, lend, borrow, invest, insure decisions to make sure they're doing their due diligence. Banks are a heavy user of our office to do the due diligence before they open an account, and just on and on and on. We support a lot of businesses in small puzzle piece ways so that they can have adequate business information to make an informed decision.
You've said several times that cybersecurity, one of your biggest priorities in your job. Elaborate on what your office can keep doing going into a next term if you were elected.
Well, cybersecurity is a race without a finish line. So cybersecurity has always got to be top of mind. You mentioned international. There are foreign actors who do think that the Secretary of State's office in a state can be a conduit to the federal Secretary of State's office, and certainly nothing is further from the truth than that. But we have valuable data information here. We have some confidential information, and cybersecurity is number one. We are constantly testing and self-evaluating, have third-party validators to come test and see where vulnerabilities might be. We believe in redundancy. We believe in multiple layers of protection. We have some, I can't tell you too much about some of them because that would be giving away the farm, but we have ways of telling if someone approaching our website is coming from an international source and that the computer that they're using is either in Chinese or Cyrillic or some other language. We have pattern detectors when folks come and try to get the open information that we have, but they have kind of suspicious patterns. We can identify those kinds of things.
You were the first woman elected. You were the first woman elected to statewide position, statewide office back in 1996. Do you consider yourself a trailblazer?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I know that I've opened doors for a lot of other women. Some I know, and a lot of them I don't know. It's amazing when somebody stops me on the street, a mom, a dad, and introduces me to their daughter or granddaughter and say, she opened doors for you. She achieved one of the highest levels in this state. Just to show them what a person is like, that we're not some kind of robot or something, to be in these offices, that we're human beings, and that personal touch is very, very, very important to have other people identify with you, if possible, that you're a real life human being. And I'm a farm girl from Maryland. I was not raised in this state. I didn't go to school in the state until I went to Campbell University. I don't have those networks. So if you work hard and you have a good game plan and a good education, you can achieve in this state. And I think that's what parents and grandparents want to show their daughters in particular.
Let me ask you the other end of that question, and it's a hard question to ask, but a lot's been made about age when it comes to presidential candidates. Do you think age should be a factor in deciding people's elected office?
Well, I think experience is what matters. And with age comes experience and wisdom. And as long as you demonstrate that you're physically able and mentally capable, that should not be an issue. I'm blessed with pretty good genes. I come from a family of long livers, and I'm just here for, I've got the energy to do the job, the intellectual capacity, and of course I surround myself with good people who know my mission and know how to accomplish that.
Secretary of State Elaine Marshall. Secretary, thanks for coming on. Good to speak to you again.
Thank you very much.
Coming up next, we hear from Republican candidate for Secretary of State, Republican Chad Brown. Gaston County Commissioner, known pretty well around these parts as the former mayor of Stanley and current chairman of the Gaston County Board of Commissioners, now looking to become the first Republican Secretary of State in North Carolina since 1877. Joining us now, Commissioner Chad Brown. Commissioner, good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
All right, what's your one-line sales pitch to voters who might not know you and why you think they should choose you?
Well, I think when you look at what's happening in our economy right now, we have a high inflation rate. We need to make sure we have businesses who can thrive and do things in North Carolina. I think I'm the best salesman for that. We've been doing it in Gaston County for the last 14 years as a commissioner, so my pedigree stands for itself. But I think when you look at North Carolina, we need to make sure that we have a robust economy continuing. But when we get through these pieces of the puzzle, we need to make sure that we're helping people to work through the system, because I think government and what's happening in the Secretary of State's office is a cumbersome system right now.
Speaking of, your opponent has been in the office for a long time, I think 30-something years, almost 30 years. Why do you think you could do something better?
Well, I think when you look at what's happening, I want to be involved. I want to make sure that we go and work with those entrepreneurs or those companies who are bringing economic development. I've been doing it for the last 14 years, the last 4 as chairman in Gaston County, to make sure that we continue to help them get through the system. And when you help them hand in glove, when you can try to do things a little bit better with technology and what's happening right now, I think I got a better fix on that. And so I want to make sure we push that narrative to try to help the citizens and the entrepreneurs who want to start a business to get started in North Carolina.
Hard to believe, but there's not been a Republican Secretary of State, I think, in more than 100 years.
1877.
Which is wild when you consider we elect statewide Republicans and all sorts of things, but not for some reason Secretary of State. Why do you think that is?
I think when you look at what's happening as a whole, and that time it was appointed, it wasn't even elected at that time, but we've had a system in North Carolina where Republicans tend to not vote like they should, and I'm not saying they're not going to vote. They assume that they're going to lose because the Democrats did have a stronghold for a long time on all the council of state races, and until I think Sherry Berry was the longest serving Republican who had a stronghold. So now we look forward to that. In 2010, the legislature and the General Assembly was turned over, so now I think you see some changes, and we're excited about 2024.
On your website and in some of your public appearances, you've been very outspoken about issues like the Second Amendment and being pro-life. There's also a lot of discussion about nationalizing our politics and how it's not necessarily positive for local issues. In your job, you'd be dealing with businesses and the government. Why wade into those issues?
Well, I think those are people want to know who you are. Those right there were just character backgrounds of a bio. They didn't have nothing to do with what we want to do as a business sector. When you look at what I want to do as a business sector, I want to change and have a better overview of that. But when you think about the Second Amendment, I am pro-Second Amendment. I'm pro-life. I'm a proud Republican. I'm a Christian. Yeah. So those are all bio issues that I want people to know who I am. And when you really delve into our website or any of our platforms or videos, you'll see who I really am and what we want to do for the sector of North Carolina businesses.
You had an interesting, rather non-conventional approach to fundraising, offering folks, I believe it was $50 to your campaign for a gun raffle, basically. Where did this come from, and would you consider it a success?
Well, I'd say it's been a success. We have a lot of people who want the right to bear arms, and one of the things that's happened, when you go out and you're trying to raise money for the Council of State, the Secretary of State's not the sexiest office, I'll tell you, when you're trying to raise money. My opponent has put up, or the party that she's with, put up over $1 million to beat me. And I find that very heartening to say, hey, I am a viable opponent. So when you look at things that we do for the Second Amendment, I'm a pro-Second Amendment, love it. And I think America has spoken. And so when you ask about what we've raised on that, we've done very well to say our fundraising efforts were great.
You've talked about fostering a more vibrant business community. And we had the candidate in for Secretary of Labor, and he talked about the same sort of thing. How do you think you would do that?
Well, I think when you look at, we need to work hand in glove with these people who are doing business, not necessarily the ones that are coming, but the ones who are there now. We lose just as many businesses in a month that we actually bring in. So when you think about how I want to do it, I want to make sure that we put different stations. I want to petition the General Assembly to put a station over in the Asheville area, Charlotte area, Raleigh, and Wilmington, because you shouldn't have to drive 4 to 6 hours just to see somebody face to face to get your business started. You should be able to go in and work with them. But we want to have a mobile unit. So like the disaster that's hit, we want to make sure we do things differently than what's happening right now. I think we don't have a hands-on approach. And I think when you can go to a business owner or somebody who's putting their money up front, I think you need to work with them any way you can. I think that's what we're doing that's successful in Gaston County. I have been attentive to their needs and listening to what they need, and that's what they're telling me they want. They talk about how cumbersome it is to get through the system just of a website. We're still using paper checks. There's a lot of ways that we can do things. It's a lot different, and I want to change that. I want to make sure that we're efficient in the way we do business in North Carolina, and I think we have a stronghold and a strong platform to do that.
You talked about it's not the sexiest position in the Council of State, and I know you've played baseball, you've been a mayor, you're a commissioner right now, chairman. How did you arrive on this specifically?
Well, I think when you looked at what I do as I want to say my overview of life. You know, I've been a salesman, I've been in business, I've owned small business. I've tried to do things differently. And I think this is the one that hit the closest to what I most performed for. A lot of people said, oh, you should run for lieutenant governor or some other sector of the council of state. I like where I'm at. I like the business sector, and I want to make, because it's the foundation. Small business is the foundation of this country. It's going to be the foundation of what we have in North Carolina. And we have to protect those rights and make sure we help these people.
All right, Commissioner Chad Brown. Commissioner, thanks for coming on.
Best
of luck on the campaign trail. We appreciate it. How state election officials are working to make sure folks impacted by Hurricane Helene are able to vote in this year's election. Welcome back to Flashpoint. Helene's devastation means some voters will be unable to get to polling sites. But election officials are working to make sure everybody has the chance to vote. WCNC Charlotte's Kaylin Hagwood spoke with state election leaders who are approving new measures to help out.
North Carolina election leaders meeting up Monday to decide how voters will cast their ballots, as many remain cut off from power, water, and critical supplies.
Our job is to figure out, as long as there are citizens in those communities, how do we provide them with voting opportunities?
In a unanimous bipartisan vote, the State Board of Elections approving a list of emergency measures for the hardest hit areas, including allowing affected voters to request and receive absentee ballots in person at county elections offices and reassigning poll workers where needed to fill in the gaps.
Today's actions allow us to move forward, adapt to the circumstances these counties and voters face, and ensure every eligible voter is able to cast their ballot.
The changes come as some polling locations face severe damage, with the state calling on the National Guard to help.
We can erect National Guard tents. FEMA representatives, there are trailers or RVs that they can bring in, and we can set those up.
Another issue, mail-in ballots, with the state elections director saying some are still lost after the storm.
We are still working through identifying those, but any voter who's concerned about the status of their ballot can certainly, if they had made the request, they can sign up for Ballot Tracks, which is a service that we provide to all voters who vote absentee by mail, where they can follow their ballot in the mail stream.
Kaylin Hagwood, WCNC Charlotte.
Up next on Flashpoint, the concerns about how Duke Energy has handled the flooding as a result of Hurricane Helene. Welcome back to Flashpoint. In the wake of Hurricane Helene, flooded homeowners who live above and below Lake Norman are convinced Duke Energy's decisions regarding the storm protected Lake Norman at the expense of those living near it. In a recent filing, the utility told federal regulators the flooding in those areas was unpreventable. But WCNC Charlotte's Nate Morabito continues to hear from victims who are convinced otherwise.
From the Catawba River in Charlotte,
my heart is just fractured,
to Lookout Shoals Lake in Claremont.
It smells like rotting fish. It's sour smelling, and it's hard to breathe.
Two communities, 40 miles apart, are connected.
The bottom drawers were completely saturated with water.
By water.
that last standing house.
Both are at the mercy of the utility that controls it.
Never, ever have four houses slammed into my house.
Each shares their own sense.
This is a lot of water heading our way. They knew it.
Of extreme loss and anger.
Duke Energy fell asleep at the wheel. But actually, they didn't fall asleep. They were wide awake. They didn't do what they should have done.
In between the two sits Lake Norman. During Helene, Duke Energy records show the water at the lakes directly above and below Lake Norman increased well above their licensed maximum levels, increasing by roughly 12 feet compared to the much larger Lake Norman, which barely and only briefly crested above its maximum, rising only about 3 feet. The communities where lake levels rose well above maximum levels are places where the median household incomes are much lower than the Lake Norman community.
It feels like, we're taking the brunt because these homes aren't worth as much.
I know it was biblical proportions too. I get it. It's a lot to manage, but they could have done it.
We're also managing water in a very controlled way. We've been doing that since before the storm and through the time after the storm, and that helps to protect the communities along the river and help to manage any flooding that we see.
Duke Energy has said the utility started moving water through its 11-lake system on the Tuesday before Helene hit, but won't release specifics. telling us the flooding at smaller lakes like Lookout Shoals and Mountain Island and downstream was unpreventable due to the historic amount of rainfall. In a statement, the utility told us lakes are managed as an integrated system, not for the benefit of a single lake. The utility noted it operated its lakes, including Lake Norman, to reduce the impacts of flooding for lake and river neighbors upstream and downstream prior to, during, and after the storm. Adding, Duke Energy is confident its hydro operations team managed this event as effectively as possible to help mitigate flooding impacts for all lake and river neighbors and the public.
We came from Minnesota, a land of 10,000 lakes.
For those with a long-time connection to the water,
I've lived on the river for 20 plus years.
They have lost faith.
We just can't stay here anymore. It's just not worth it.
And remain skeptical.
Yes, they could have.
Convinced Duke Energy could have done more.
What do you do?
To protect them.
And I still have a house, sort of.
And their properties. Nate Morabito, WCNC Charlotte.
All right, folks, come interact with us on social media. Let us know what you'd like to see here on Flashpoint. And of course, you can listen and subscribe to our podcast. You can find it wherever you get yours. And we'll see you back here next weekend.